David Shaw here with another off-the-record story. If you want to learn more about Washington, D.C., come visit my site, offtherecordtours.com. Let's go. My hero, George C. Marshall, is buried right here in Arlington National Cemetery. He's the most important American you've never heard of. A Pennsylvania native, Marshall attended the Virginia Military Institute. After graduation, he joined the Army. He first served in the Philippines. In the peacetime Army, there were few promotions, and he spends 9 years as a lieutenant. He's decorated for his service in World War I, serves as an aide to Army Chief of Staff General John Pershing, oversees civilian conservation corps camps in the Northwest, and comes to Washington and works in the War Plans Division. And then, FDR selects him over 32 higher-ranking generals and promotes him to Army Chief of Staff. When he was Army Chief of Staff, George Marshall wanted nothing more to command the invasion of France. But he believed that was the president's decision to make, not his, and he refused to lobby for the job. FDR chose Eisenhower. He told Marshall, "I didn't feel I could sleep at ease if you were out of Washington." Marshall was never political. He never joined a party. He didn't even vote. When asked about his political affiliation, he often said that his father had been a Democrat, his mother a Republican, whereas he was an Episcopalian. When the war ends, Marshall takes a hard-earned retirement. But no sooner is he home than President Truman asks him to be his special envoy to China. When he turns from that job, Truman calls again, this time asking him to serve as Secretary of State. Marshall, with his sense of duty, can't say no. The Secretary of State designed what became known as the Marshall Plan. It saved Europe from starvation, helped rebuild it after the war's destruction, and prevented the spread of communism. For this, he received the 1953 Nobel Peace Prize, the only soldier to do so. Marshall, exhausted, leaves state, and Truman names him to the largely honorary position as President of the Red Cross. But when the Korean War breaks out, Truman realizes he needs new leadership at the Defense Department. There is only one person he knows can do the job. It's Marshall. He's tired from years of work, but for Marshall, service comes first, and to the Pentagon he goes. In 1951, after 41 years of continuing service, George Marshall retires to his home in Virginia. Marshall was a very humble man. Despite being witness to the major events of the last century, he never wrote his memoirs. He said to do so, he would have to write about those no longer living, and they would not have the opportunity to comment or react on what he wrote. And he believed that would not be fair. So why do I like George Marshall so much? Well, first of all, he grew up not far from where I did, in southwestern Pennsylvania. But that's pretty much where the similarities end. I admire him for his commitment to public service, even when things were frustrating and when they got tough. He was a lieutenant for 9 years. There was very little promotion back then in the Army. It could have been easy for him to just toss it all in and go do something else. He would have been successful in so many things, but he stuck it out. And while he was in the Army for 35 years, he never served in combat. He would have been immensely qualified, and he wanted nothing more to command Operation Overlord, D-Day, in World War II. And he could have went to FDR and said, "I want it," and FDR probably would have given it to him. But no. Marshall knew that was not his place. It was the president who had to make that decision, even though Marshall was probably not pleased with the outcome. Eisenhower is selected, and he rides that horse all the way to the White House. In 1959, at the age of 78, George Marshall dies. While entitled to an Armed Services Military Honors funeral, Marshall requested very simple proceedings. He lay in repose at Washington National Cathedral for 24 hours, after which his body was taken to the Fort Myer Chapel. There, President Eisenhower, former President Truman, and 200 invited guests attended a 22-minute burial service. There was no eulogy. It was the simplest service ever conducted for a man of his rank and prestige. Marshall selected this spot for his grave, but his second wife had the last word on the headstone. It describes his deceased first wife as wife, while his second wife listed herself as beloved wife. Well, I hope you enjoyed that off-the-record story. If you want to learn more about Washington, D.C., things seen and unseen, arrange your tour of your nation's capital at offtherecordtours.com. Until then, I'm David Shaw.